Tzimitras. I'm the director of the PRIO Cyprus Center, and it is a distinct pleasure to welcome you all as part here of the Cyprus Forum on a panel that we think is very topical, the 20 years from the accession of the European Union, Cyprus to the European Union. This is, of course, a year of anniversaries, too many perhaps, 1964, 1974, 2004, 2004. But this, I think, is both an occasion to have a sober assessment of things, but also a way of rejoicing at the achievement of 20 years into the EU. This panel is a collaboration with EROPEUM, operating out of Prague, in a European Union served project on the legacy from the accession of the enlargement of 2004. And so with that, may I ask Martin Vokalek, the head of EROPEUM, to address the crowd, and then we'll go into the discussion. Martin, please.
Thank you very much, dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and speakers. My name is Martin Vokalek, and it's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the European Institute for European Policy, which, as it was mentioned, is a think tank based in Prague, but also operating from Brussels. We are the leader of the common project, which is called Reuniting the East and West, Reflections of the 2004 EU Enlargement, which is this event is taking part, and I'm really welcoming you here, and I would like you all to join the discussions here. Because the year 2004 marks an important milestone in the history of the European integration, as it was a moment when the Iron Curtain on the European continent definitely dissolved, and 8 countries from the Central and Eastern Europe, together with Cyprus and Malta, joined the European Union. While we celebrate the moment of a European reunification and the numerous benefits the EU brings to its member states, including Cyprus and Czech Republic, this anniversary should also be a present and innovation for a joint reflection of the past 20 years we spent together and how the Big Bang enlargement shaped the European Union as we know it today. The most important questions we are supposed to ask are where this enlargement helped us to be stronger, where it revealed our weak spots we should work on, how we can together tackle the challenges we are now facing all across Europe, and last but not least, what lessons can we use from the past enlargement for the future enlargement of the EU towards Western Balkan and Eastern Partnership countries, because this is the only reasonable way forward and only way how we can tackle the challenges to come. So our project aims exactly to do that. We are bringing together altogether 8 different institutions representing 8 different countries from the new and old parts of the Europe, and representing South, North, East and West of Europe all together. And we are contributing to the discussions and research with many research publications, with events such like this, but also very specific research focusing, for example, on the cost of non-enlargement in the future, or on the role of the women in the enlargement of 2004, and how to get inspired and support the women in the current process of enlargement. So I'm really glad that we are joined by the strong partners such as Institute of International Relations from Italy, the Egmont Royal Institute from Belgium, Hellenic Foundation Eliamed from Greece, Finnish Institute of International Relations, College of Eastern Europe and from Poland, Latvian Institute of International Affairs, and last but not least, it's my warmest pleasure to thank PRIO Cyprus Center for being our partner here in Cyprus, for co-organizing this event with us, and for doing the event with such a great lineup we are having. And last but not least, I would also like to thank the advisory board of the project, which is consisted of the great people who very strongly and significantly contributed to stronger and enlarged Europe in 2004, and were supporting the common European project for many years. From Cyprus, it's Madame Androulla Vassileiou, former member of the parliament and former EU commissioner, and I very much thank you for being the part also of these activities. So with this being said, thank you very much for being here. Please have a fruitful discussions, and let's discuss past 20 years, but let's focus also on the way forward. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Martin. I think this is a panel that will talk on the record, of course, of achievements and even perhaps be a little self-critical. But we wanted to do that also in a way that resonates with our daily narratives. And in this respect, it's wonderful that we have people with us who have actually run some of the organs in the EU, the Commission versus the Parliament, or the Commission with the Parliament. We'll have to see how it goes. People who manage the accession process, because Mrs. Vassileiou was not only the Commissioner, but perhaps, I hesitate to say more importantly, but she also was the spouse of the president that got Cyprus into the European Union. So a lot of anecdotal knowledge there of the doings, as well as Cleopatra Kitti, head of the Mediterranean Growth Initiative, who worked for the accession, with the accession, and after, both on the part of the Greek presidency with George Papandreou, but also actively in Brussels for this. So a wealth of information, feelings from the time. Professor Niyazi Kızılyürek needs little introduction also, a former member of the European Parliament, the first of Turkish Cypriot origin. And I think that's extremely important to have a voice that will give us also the feeling in Brussels, but also vice versa, the feeling from the Turkish Cypriot community, the views on accession and the aftermath. And last but certainly not least, Professor Stephanie Laulhe, head of the law faculty at UCLan, the University of Central Lancashire in Cyprus, someone who has worked very, very extensively on European affairs, both from the legal but also the political point of view. And who gives me pleasure to announce yesterday we published an occasional paper out of PRIO, authored by Professor Shaelou, on exactly that, the 20 years from accession to the European Union, but also to the EMU, later on with the Eurozone. So it will be super interesting to hear comments on the before, the during, and the after. Without further ado, let me kindly ask Commissioner Vassileiou to give us the keynote speech of the day. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, first of all, I thank the organizers for this initiative, which is, I think, very appropriate at this time for Cyprus. At least 20 years of my late life have been interwoven with Cyprus's accession process and later with the first years of Cyprus's participation in the Union. It's not just as the wife of the chief negotiator, but I was for 10 years a member of the European Committee of the Cyprus Parliament, and therefore we had to study and pass about more than 80,000 laws, some of them amending the present legal system, or new laws, which we had to adopt. I will try to answer two questions. First, to what extent has our accession met the expectations of the Cypriots? And on the other hand, to what extent has the expectations of the EU from the accession of Cyprus been met? So let me try with the first one. As we know, Cyprus is a small island state in the Eastern Mediterranean and could not afford remaining isolated from continental Europe, both for economic and security reasons. The Cypriots were hoping that our accession to the EU would facilitate the solution of the Cyprus problem. However, we should not lose sight of the fact that the solution of the Cyprus problem was and still is the responsibility of the United Nations. And the EU can only facilitate the process and make sure that the solution eventually of the Cyprus problem would not be in violation of the acquis communautaire, and especially the basic principles and freedoms of the EU. In fact, the EU was always hoping that the Cyprus problem would have been solved before our accession. That was always our aim, and both President Clearidis and Mr. Vassileiou were striving to do so, although Mr. Tektash unfortunately remained adamant in his negative attitude. Even President Papadopoulos gave them assurances that he would support the Annan plan so that Cyprus would accede with the Cyprus problem solved. That is why after the referendum, Commissioner Verheugen and many others were very furious with us and created a hostile climate for Cyprus in the beginning of our accession. As we saw, however, the EU was always willing to offer their assistance whenever we needed it in connection with Cyprus problem and participated in all important UN-sponsored meetings in Cyprus, including the latest, that is Geneva, Montpellier, and Grand Montana. But let me turn to other fields in which Cyprus benefited a lot from our accession. Most importantly, our small island state is participating fully in the formulation of EU policies through our participation in the European Commission as an equal member of the College. The Cypriot members of Parliament, despite our limited number, are participating in the various political groups and their decision-making and in the various parliamentary committees and the plenary. On this point, I will revert later when I answer the second question. Our President is a full and equal member of the European Council, and our ministers participate fully in the various council formations. So through the Parliament and the Council, Cyprus participates fully in the legislative process. One may argue that 6 votes cannot make a difference in Parliament. But as we know, every vote counts, and our voice can influence decisions. I would say that small member states can and have ways of influencing decision-making. How did Malta, a smaller state than Cyprus, manage to project one of its 6 members and succeed in her election twice as President of the European Parliament? How did Luxembourg, also a smaller state than Cyprus, succeeded in having one of its nationals elected as President of the Commission? And I'm talking, of course, about Jacques Santer. Lastly, let us not forget Cyprus's participation in the European Court of Justice, the Court of Auditors, and one of our nationals has been recently elected Vice President of the European Investment Bank. As we know, there are many areas in which Cyprus profited a lot from accession. Do we remember the hassle that we had to face crossing the borders of European countries? Do we remember the fees that we had to pay for our students to study in European universities, or the difficulties encountered in obtaining a working permit in any European country? Do we remember the hassle of having to convert our money every time we had to travel in another country? All these difficulties have gone. Thousands of Cypriots found jobs in other European countries. Thousands of students are studying in European universities, and in the same terms as their respective nationals. And we can now travel anywhere in Europe without any formalities, but by just showing our ID card and paying with euros in all member states of the Europe Group area. Thousands of our university students benefit from their participation in the Erasmus Plus program, which, from my experience, transforms their life and gives them new prospects for the future. Have you visited our villages in the last few years? Their transformation is impressive because of EU funds that pour in from structural funds. This, of course, applies to the transformation of our cities as well. Just think of the seafront of Limassol. Think of Paphos transformation and now Larnaca and others. Let me now come to another chapter which I consider of an immense importance, that of research and innovation. Since our accession, Cyprus has demonstrated exceptional performance in securing funding from the EU Framework Programme for Research and Innovation. It is specifically under Horizon 2020 that Cyprus secured €3 for every €1 contributed to the programme through the contribution to the EU budget. As a result, Cyprus was a net beneficiary in EU research and innovation funding, gaining triple the amount of its contribution. Additionally, Cyprus secured 120 million from the EU to establish 8 centres of research excellence, 4 of which are coordinated by the University of Cyprus, and in another one they are also participating as partners. We must point out that the University of Cyprus ranks among the top 100 universities in Europe for securing funding from the EU Framework Programme for Research and Innovation. Another institution which is has a very high record of success is, of course, the Cyprus Institute, then to a lesser extent, the Cyprus University of Technology, and others. One additional benefit of our success in this area is that hundreds of Cypriot scientists found employment in these centers of excellence, young people who would have otherwise seek employment in other countries. Another area in which Cyprus has profited immensely is the area of food safety. As you know, the EU has one of the most effective rapid alert systems of the world. Once a defective foodstuff is discovered in any member state, that state immediately notifies the center, and in their turn, they immediately notify all the member states, and they have to withdraw that item from all their shelves. On many occasions, as a Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, of course, I had to face serious food crises. Serious controls are also carried out in all foreign countries, third world countries, from which importation of food is allowed. Can you imagine what would have happened if Cyprus were not a member of the EU and we had to face the COVID pandemic on our own? Just think of it. Moreover, the Recovery and Resilience Fund, which was set up by the von der Leyen Commission to enable member states to recover, as the title suggests, from the negative effects of the pandemic and enable them to become strong and resilient. Under this fund, Cyprus will get a total of €1 billion in form of grants and 200 million in a form of loan from the EU. However, this huge amount will not be given without any strings attached. Cyprus is obliged to carry out a great number of reforms and investments which will be done in stages and be completed by the end of 2026. As each state is being completed, Cyprus will be entitled to withdraw X amount. Lastly, it is worth mentioning that the famous or infamous Great Sea electricity interconnector between Israel, Cyprus, and Crete is going to be financed partly by the EU to the extent of 657 million from the Connecting Europe facility, as it is considered as a project of common interest by the EU, and another 100 million will have to be invested from Cyprus under the Recovery and Resilience Fund. Dear friends, I will now come to the second question, namely, to what extent has Cyprus' accession met the EU's expectations? Regarding the Cyprus question, I believe the EU is not at all happy with the continuation of the status quo in Cyprus and the ensuing problems we constantly face as a result. That is why the EU is more than eager to help the two communities in any way they can. Cyprus is failing to meet EU obligations in several areas. Emissions and renewable energy targets have not been met. Environmental policies have been insufficient and inadequately implemented. The absence of ambitious goals is accompanied by lack of urgency to meet obligations. Due to the very high consumption patterns, Cyprus has one of the fastest rising waste generation rates. The environmental, health, and socioeconomic impacts of the uncontrolled disposal of waste are also considerable given the size of the island. The reduction of waste generation rates and their management according to the waste hierarchy is therefore a priority. We are always in breach of the rules regarding Natura 2000. Just think of what is happening in the Agamas Peninsula or in the Cabo Greco area. Lastly, I wish to speak about Cyprus' participation and representation in the various EU institutions and agencies. I must admit that the situation has improved in the recent years. But in the first years of our accession, I had noticed that on many occasions, Cyprus's seat at conferences and other meetings remained vacant. Somehow, we were thinking that our presence was not important. This created a vacuum between Cyprus and the remaining member states. Of course, the distance and the lack of direct flights with Brussels and the majority of member states made our participation difficult. But I'm sure that we all appreciate the importance of our presence and active participation. In the European Parliament, most of the times, and I think Niyazi would say something, I'm sure about it, most of the times, our representatives are interested about the Cyprus issue. Most of our MPs choose to join the Committee of Foreign Affairs, and very seldomly do they join other committees. From my experience, when they take the floor, it is mostly to speak about the Cyprus issue, and seldomly on another issue. And as we know, mutuality and reciprocity are very important among member states. I want to believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we have improved in this area as well, because despite Cyprus's small size, we should show the world that we take an interest about everything that is happening, whether it concerns us directly or indirectly. We have to convince them that Cyprus matters and can play a positive role in EU affairs. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Vassileiou, for this extremely informative regarding raw data as well, but more importantly, a very realistic, a very critical take on things. I think it sets very well the tone for our discussion. I can't help in my academic hat of thinking how important it is to systematize things methodologically. And drawing on the excellent paper that I mentioned before that Professor Shaelou has authored, if I could turn to her to ask for exactly that, a methodological take, if you like, a framework of expectations, but also outcomes, the reasons for joining the EU, and how did it go? From soft security, as you argue, down to differential integration models. Things have certainly progressed, but was there a direct or indirect delivery on the expectations? If I could turn to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, first of all, and thank you for the excellent cooperation with PRIO Cyprus. And yes, in fact, I'm very pleased that the occasional paper was published yesterday. I am the co-author. My co-author is Dr. Fivos Athanasiou, who cannot be with us today. So what we tried to do in that paper is to summarize and analyze, as was said by Mr. Chair, the reasons for Cyprus's accession to the EU and to the Eurozone, as well as what materialized, so the outcomes, and the implications of this accession, and to reflect on current and future trends. Now, I would just like to say to Commissioner Vassileiou that I am a product of Erasmus, so hadn't it been for Erasmus, I would not be here with you today. Not that I was an Erasmus student in Cyprus, I'm too old for this, but obviously my half is from Cyprus. And
She had many intermarriages.
Exactly, so I am a product of this, and it's important to say it, and I also actually did my PhD on the principles of Cyprus's integration into the European Union, so you see. It can lead to many different things. So I think just to say a few words, first of all, about the peculiarities of Cyprus. We all know that the island of Cyprus has its own specificities, historically, geographically, geopolitically, constitutionally. I will not turn to that now because this is not the point of today. Also, that Cyprus differs from the other member states mentioned by our Czech colleague earlier, in other words, the 2004 enlargement, which is 8 Central and European countries, Central and Eastern European countries, plus 2 islands, Malta and Cyprus. It even differs from Malta in different ways. So I'm going to try to explain to you why, and also while we reflect on the 20 years of Cyprus's membership to the European Union, to think about what is forthcoming for the Cyprus EU presidency that is forthcoming in the first part of 2026. So the first point I want to make, or the first argument that is developed in the paper, is that although the main reason Cyprus aspired to join the EU was national security rather than economic considerations, actually what transpired in the past 20 years is that economic considerations provided the island with considerable benefits, financial benefits, and economic considerations actually materialized more easily and more quickly than national security. So that is the first point. So why am I saying that? So, the bid, Cyprus's bid, was particular from the point of view of the division of the island. And trade considerations were, of course, important, as well as economic considerations, but not as important as national security. We actually, when we joined in 2004, we were not net receiver of EU funds. We became in the making because we acquired the necessary culture to do so. But when we joined, actually, we should, I mean, if we had joined as a unified island, we would have become a net beneficiary much more quickly than by joining as a divided island. And it's only when the financial crisis hit that there was a sense of, obviously, Cyprus needing more funding from the EU. It didn't have to do either with this process of democratization that we could see in the Central and Eastern European countries. Not that the rule of law is particularly strong in Cyprus, and this is something maybe we can return to later, but that wasn't the main point of the Cyprus bid. Neither this return to Europe that we have seen elsewhere. Security considerations were critical for Cyprus in its EU accession bid. And unlike the Central and Eastern European countries, which had already joined NATO by the time of their accession to the EU, the Republic of Cyprus was not at the time, and nor is it now, a NATO member. Cyprus is the only EU member state that is neither a NATO member nor a participant to the so-called NATO-sponsored Partnership for Peace program. Even Malta was at some point. So on that front, not much progress, if you want, in the last 20 years. So Cyprus saw the EU as a provider of soft power or soft security, non-military security, if you see what I mean. And this was important in terms of also being able to claim or to make a point, ascertain the sovereignty of the Republic of Cyprus over the whole of its territory. Also, that's another important point. As well as hoping that the EU could act as a catalyst for resolution of the Cyprus dispute. Commissioner Vassileiou has already very correctly outlined, the limits of this approach to facilitating or participating directly to the Cyprus issue and to the negotiations. So, Cyprus, by joining, acquired considerable leverage vis-à-vis Turkey. That's, I think, clear, particularly through the so-called veto, the possibility, which has been used on some occasions at the beginning, after joining, 2005 more or less, which has been used indirectly. However, given that Turkey's prospects to join the European Union are moving further and further away, this leverage is, of course, extremely limited nowadays. In terms of its rationale, though, this unusual bid for EU accession is not without parallels to what's currently ongoing in the rest of Europe, particularly for Moldova, Georgia, and the Ukraine, which have all concluded association agreements with the EU, subsequent to Russia's Federation annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014 and the resulting outbreak of hostilities in eastern Ukraine. So this is something we can all think of. Not to mention that, of course, the Cyprus model, inverted commas, or example, if you want, of differentiated integration was very much discussed during Brexit for Northern Ireland. We could also mention that. The second point I want to make, and perhaps this is going to be a little bit more controversial, is that, as I said before, while Cyprus was focusing and is focusing, as we heard it, on the Cyprus problem, it seemed that the benefits of joining the European Union and then the Eurozone very, very quickly after came with a financial crisis in 2012, 2013. In what sense? Because the tools that were available to Cyprus as a member of the Eurozone were simply much more than the tools that are available to non-Eurozone members who are member states of the European Union. I can dig into details later if you want. And I am not, of course, diminishing the fact that the outcome of the bail-in in Cyprus and the haircut is absolutely tragic and should have been avoided. But again, I'm going to use this reverse analysis that Commissioner Vassileiou used as well, which is urbanization. Think about what would have happened if we were not in the Eurozone and if we did not have the possibility of using the ESM system, the European Stability Mechanism system. So probably things would have been even worse. I know it's difficult to think about that, but it's probably the fact that the country would have gone into bankruptcy, very simply. So this is about the Eurozone. Why did we join very quickly the Eurozone? Again, it is a way to, anchor ourselves into the European family, maintain and sustain sovereignty, including economic, in economic terms. Also, the single currency can be an important aspect of the negotiations during the Cyprus problem, because this was one of the points of contention as to what currency would be used and what would be the role of the central bank, the future central bank. So with the single currency, some of those issues are, proposed, and so on and so forth. And the last point I want to make, and I will stop there, is that this unprecedented accession to the EU of a divided country, it may actually provide a blueprint, obviously it cannot be within the treaties, but a blueprint at the very least for future enlargements where sui generis circumstances prevail, such as a conflict. So I've written across the years, over the years, about that differentiated integration of Cyprus into the European Union. So this partial model, if you want, of European integration, which we can discuss, of course, disagree on, but it's clear that there are many different variations on the scale of EU integration, in fact. Why is this important? Because one of the problems of a divided territory is that the government of that territory, the legitimate government of that territory, doesn't have effective control over all that territory. So by joining European Union, it's a way to make sure that that country is not penalized for not being able to effectively control the whole of its territory. So this is enshrined into the treaties via protocols so that that member state can actually work equally with the other member states, as was picked up before, while being shielded from actually being responsible for some of the lack of implementation and enforcement of laws and regulations of the EU level. And so, yes, more than one level of European integration is conceivable, even if it's not desirable. And personally, I have worked for years on the idea that market integration can prevail and can precede political integration. And this is probably why we're in this room anyway, in the first place. So this is an important point, and I will stop there, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Many, many thanks for that. I think it provides us the necessary framework for understanding how things happen. But the framework is the framework, the goals are the goals, and the outcomes are the outcomes. How did it all happen? I'm turning to someone who's been, who was there before, during, and after. Someone who was in Nicosia, in Athens, in Brussels, and who lived the whole thing. Perhaps run some of it. So with that, let me turn to Cleopatra Kitti, who's a very international Cypriot before Europe, my understanding is correct, lived all around the world, so brings in a very nice international cosmopolitan perspective to things, perhaps going a little bit 30,000 feet up and looking at things in a perspective that sometimes escapes us here in Cyprus.
Thank you, Mari, and thank you, PRIO, for entrusting me to be part of this project. I want to recognize Mrs. Vassileiou here, who has been instrumental herself and her family, her husband and herself, as leaders of Cyprus that inspired the accession, the submission, the whole process, and her own leadership in the Commission, my fellow speakers here. But I also want to recognize the school from Paphos, Polis Chrysouchous, who is here, to thank them for making the long trip and sit with us. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks.
So,
Thank you.
Merabalar, Iyigünder, Kalimera. What my story, I realized in preparing for this speech that Cyprus's accession story dovetails with my own career and life story. So what I have to say today is very much a personal story on which I've built my learnings from working as a initially non-European and then a European on Cyprus, Brussels, but also how the world sees Cyprus and Brussels through this process. So 3 key words I'd like our fellow students here and the audience to take away from my message today. The first one is perspective. The second one is lifelong learning. And the third one is collaboration. So nothing happens without all of us working for something. So I see Cyprus in the EU trajectory in 3 periods. The pre-accession period, the 1993-95, when we were approved as fit to process our application. Then the second would be the negotiation, harmonizing the acquis, the laws of Europe, which was 1995-2004, when the negotiation ended and the accession happened when we entered the Union. And the third is what we're discussing today, which is the membership period, 2004-2024. So the first period, it was sort of the early 90s, the first Gulf War, for those who remember, a very critical period of instability in our region. I had then founded my own strategic communications firm, and I had decided that since the Middle East wouldn't be a source of work, I should look west to Europe. And I added a strand of my work on EU affairs and understanding how the EU works. And I had proposed to our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, then late Alekos Michailidis was leading it, if I could bring some of my collaborators from abroad who were former EU Commission experts to talk to our ministry, chambers of commerce. What does it mean to be part of the European Union? What does this accession process means? And we did it. We had about 50 people in a room like today, and one thing became clear, that change would be deep, and a completely new mindset would have to prevail. So the second period, I'll move to that period of accession. 9 years later, as fate had it for me, I moved to Brussels with my family in 1999. I had completed then, I went back to school, and I was in my early 30s, and I completed a certification on EU institutional affairs. How Europe regulates. I lost my sound here, but I'll continue. How Europe regulates, it was an important new perspective in my head. It was about understanding the powers and the corridors of Brussels, intersecting between the Commission, which proposes legislation, the Parliament that debates it and votes on it, and the Council where the heads of state, somebody will fiddle on my way here.
Mine is still on.
How the Council where the heads of state sit, the presidents and prime ministers of countries, and approve or vote through or negotiate and vote through legislation. So, two strands of the Brussels work became very clear. The first, the diligent technocratic work that takes place at Commission level, where everybody goes to give a voice and give a view. The Commission wants to hear from member states. The Commission welcomes view from business people, from member states, from civil society. So it becomes this very busy, beehive type of people moving in and out and claiming a voice, a view. And based on those views, Brussels Commission, the EU Commission, proposes legislation. And then the second strand would be when the political trade-offs take place. I guess Mr. Kızılyürek will talk about how the trade-offs of whose views will prevail, whose interest will be traded off with other interests would occur. And it was in this environment that I took my first job, which I was a senior manager, the first Greek speaker, first Mediterranean, to lead an office of a public affairs corporate advisory firm in Brussels. And during that time, and given my family had the possibility to live in the hotel where all the negotiating teams would stay, I witnessed firsthand the very long hours and the hard-working, diligent method that the Cypriot team put to negotiate Cyprus's accession in the EU. I very well remember the credit that the Cypriot negotiating team took from Brussels, that said that we were the most diligent, fast-track opening and closing chapters. So we were students #1 amongst the 10 member states for doing a great job. Thanks to Mr. Vassileiou and his team, a lot of members of the team were there. Konstantinos Lykourgos, Lida Koursoumbaa, Marina, Jensen, a lot. I mean, there were 15 people moving in and out. I also will remember Mrs. Vassileiou's input coming to support the team, flying over for the long weekends when her husband was working there. So Cyprus was commended. The aspirations were very, very high prior to 2024. It was 2001, and I'll share a bit of my learning in understanding multi-stakeholder trade-offs, when then the Greek government decided to bring expert teams into the foreign ministry and the government to assist in helping getting Greece's voice heard. And it was at a time, and picture this, it was the end of the Balkan conflict towards the early 2000s. Greece had to prepare for its presidency of the EU for 2003, and the world was changing again. So Greece had to understand, they had visionary leadership, Kostas Simitis, George Papandreou, and a lot of the technocrats at the foreign ministry. As the world was changing, a new treaty had come in of how the institutions were working. They wanted to understand, and that was my job, they wanted to understand the competencies. What would make a good member state versus a not effective member state? What does it mean to have a presidency of the EU from a large member state to a small member state? What are the competencies? But also get Greece's voice heard. The Americans, the Poles, the French, the Germans were very determined in shaping the agenda. How could a small member state like Greece shape a different perspective? So that was my job, which meant I had to really deep dive and create a team of institutional experts like Professor Shaelou, a team of communicators, a team of institutional practitioners to pull Greece into a very successful roadmap. But to me, it was an eye-opener of how multi-stakeholder diplomacy takes place. Mm-hmm. Cyprus was on the agenda, and the expectations were high. We're just before 2004, where everybody expected Cyprus to continue to be a first-star student, unite the country, and accede into the Union. But that didn't happen. We entered period 3, 2004 to today, where Cyprus is unique in Brussels. We are considered an exception for a couple of reasons that have already been mentioned. The first is that we remain a divided island. The second, we are the only isolated island or isolated country in the EU. Physically, we're not connected to the mainland, but intellectually and mentally, we are far away from what goes on in the mainland, in Europe. And the acquis, the third exception, the rule of Europe, rules of Europe, apply to some of the island because 30% of its territory does not apply the acquis. But the exception is only in the mindset. We are an exception. We feel constantly, Cypriots, and I'll go in a minute to what Cypriots state on Eurostat, on the European Agency of Statistics. They state that they feel themselves far away from Europe. In Eurostat data, Cypriots say that they first relate to their village, then to the town where they live, and third, only a 57% relates to Europe, which goes to show, and I commend the teachers from Paphos today, that it takes a big effort to instill in schools from early age to high school a Europe lesson. How do we build a European identity if we don't teach what Europe stands for, and if we don't encourage the European spirit from young age? So, a few observations as living and working abroad and working across many regions. I had the luck or the perseverance to work across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, how I see and how I feel when I work in Cyprus. I think we take policy reactively. We take what comes from Brussels, but we don't go and claim a voice and share in Brussels our own unique perspective from this border of Europe. We are Europe's southeastern border. We have experience in this part of the world. We don't go and claim our experience and voice and say, this is how we think we should be looking at that from Brussels. We have a business community that is absent from Brussels. They only go to Brussels when they need something. We don't go to Brussels to prepare the ground and build networks and relationships on which we can have collaborative ideas about what is possible. We think about what is not possible because of our division and because what keeps us apart, not what keeps us together, not what brings us together. And that has a cost. Mrs. Vassileiou talked about the political and the institutional cost. It has the cost of not doing things in its full potential, politically and economically. So if we calculate what the opportunity would have been for a united island being part of an enlarged market like Europe, politically and economically, we would have been in a different place today. So that carries cost. Another interesting point about Cyprus is that according to World Bank data, our trade is more with non-EU countries than with EU countries. So our main trade is on bunkers, which is shipping-related sector with countries like Liberia, British Virgin Islands, all the countries that have financial and corporate structures that are non-EU, but are tax-efficient structures. China, the UAE, and then comes Greece and the United Kingdom. So if we want to be more integrated in Europe, how do we shift our trade profile to do more business with our European partners? How can we invite our European partners to use Cyprus as their footprint into a wider region of Middle East and North Africa and beyond? So looking forward, Professor Shaelou mentioned that we were net contributors. We were giving more than we were taking when we first joined. Now, with the economic crisis, the transition to green, the Green Deal, and climate change, we have demanded more support. We benefit from more support from Europe. Bold figures. From 2004 to 2020, the Republic of Cyprus just received close to 2 billion euros with a combined portfolio of infrastructure funds, fisheries funds, education funds, innovation funds. And equally, for the period that's coming, 2021 to 2027, just over another 2 billion euros. So over the period, 4 billion euros on a number of issues. The EU support to Turkish Cypriots, fellow Cypriots, from 2006 to 2012 is close to 1,900,000, and a new programmatic period equally the same. If I'm not mistaken, I looked at the Eurostat data. And that, to add the Erasmus program, the value that it brings to students, academics, there's a lot of value there. But what are we doing with it? Are we shifting our perspective? It seems not. Are we building growth? It seems, are we integrated more into Europe? It seems not. In a recent EU barometer, Cypriots consider these 4 issues as key issues: migration, ensuring peace and stability, developing renewable energy, access to affordable housing, and access to jobs. Local issues, but issues that are impacted by how Europe regulates. So how far do we take our concerns and possible solutions to give our voice value in Brussels? In 2026, let me set that as a milestone, Cyprus will be having its 2nd EU presidency of the EU. A lot of work to be done for our political leadership, our civil servants, our students, our business people to prepare, because it's a great platform to advocate for what concerns us here. I will end with this. Our country is divided and remains divided. The world is changing. The region is changing. Mario Draghi, the former EU commissioner, but former Prime Minister of Italy, who has been
ECB governor.
Sorry, ECB governor. Thank you. He was mandated to prepare a report of what it necessitates for Europe to be a dynamic continent. And he came up with 3 key issues. The first is sustainable competitiveness. So Europe needs to find an engine and energy to be competitive like China and America. Economic security, its internal market to function and integrate. And open strategic autonomy, how we collectively protect our borders. So it's a good essay for the school and a good food for thought for us as citizens, European and Cypriot citizens. How do we want Cyprus to address these issues and be part of the solutions going forward? How far do we want to be European and Cypriots will depend on how much we contribute to what's coming next. Thank you. Thank you.
Cleopatra, thank you for this wonderfully vibrant account of, a first-hand account of things, but also for sharing a vision and perhaps the frustration from things that hopefully will lead us into constructive thinking. Let me turn to Professor Kızılyürek and Niyazi. I'm glad that you sit next to the Commission, because it's not always that the Parliament sees eye to eye with the Commission. But it is a fact that nearly 80% of the daily lives of European citizens is regulated by laws passed by the European Parliament. If my understanding is correct, between 73 to 82%, depending on how you count it, but certainly a very large extent. So you partake in that. And so I'd like to bring you on with your multiple hats in asking you to do multiple things in an impossible time. Give us a perspective from the EU Parliament, the legislative perspective, your experience as someone who has run these important initiatives there, but vice versa also as a Cypriot, originally from the Turkish Cypriot community, and perhaps integrate a little bit of a view, if possible, on this perspective from both ways. The views and approaches of the Turkish Cypriot community vis-à-vis Brussels, but also Brussels' view and knowledge of the Turkish Cypriot community. I know that you have been struggling for years for even one initiative for the Turkish language and all that. That might have been frustrating or rewarding, depending. So let me turn to you. And if Cleopatra said about telling a story, then Niyazi is the par excellence storyteller of the island. So please.
Thank you, Harry. Okay, before I come to my experience in the parliament, allow me just to say a few words about the accession process of Cyprus, because this is a history of failure. First, we have to say this. In Cyprus applied 1990, was considered eligible 1993, and if you were saying to European member states that Cyprus will join EU as a divided country, no one would believe in this, no one would want this, and that's why the European Union had a clear strategy to get Cyprus united into the EU. This is a failure because of many, many different reasons. Okay? I will not go into this, but definitely, to my mind, the turning point is Helsinki summit, where EU had a double strategy, offering Turkey the candidate country potential, and Cyprus accession. Okay? From there onwards, until 2003 actually, we had two failures. First part was the Turkish diplomacy, refusing the proposed Annan Plan 2002, end of it, and 2003, so from Copenhagen to Hague period. That was Turkish no to Annan Plan. And then a year after came the Greek Cypriot no to the Annan Plan. And that was a failure for the EU. No one wanted to have this result, and we got stuck there. So we have something which we have to reconsider and discuss why we failed. We missed this historical opportunity to have a united federal state member of the European Union. Now, second thing I would remind, although we failed in this, the Treaty of Accession signed by Republic of Cyprus in 2003, I think it was on 16th of April in Athens, very clearly states that the accession to Cyprus, of Cyprus to EU should be beneficiary for all citizens of Cyprus. Do we have this? Put a question mark. I repeat, it must be beneficiary for all citizens of Cyprus. Second very important aspect we ignore totally from the Treaty of Accession, that accession of Cyprus should contribute to internal peace and reconciliation in Cyprus. Two keywords, internal peace and reconciliation. Do we have anything like this? No. How we came to instrumentalize the EU as Cyprus for the solution of Cyprus conflict overshadowed actually this kind of initiatives, building reconciliation process within Ireland by being a member or using the membership of Cyprus for this scope. And I think here we failed, we Cypriots, all of us, we failed in doing so, because at the end of the day, EU has been used just to pressurize Turkey so that we can have, inverted commas, better solutions, and we don't have anything. In the meantime, Turkey anymore is not even a member where we are with a clear perspective. So we cannot build upon EU-Turkish relations solution of the Cyprus conflict. So this famous, at that time, catalyst for solution, the EU accession was, we were hearing this every day, catalyst for solution, has failed absolutely. Now, in that sense, we have to revisit our membership to the EU. Now, EU will not pressurize Turkey to have a better solution. What can we do now with our membership identity of European Union to really work for internal peace and reconciliation process? And here, I have to say, EU doesn't have any policy towards this direction, but nor the Cypriots themselves. And this is for me absolute failure, a second failure which we have to consider. Now, given this, if we don't rethink to bring people of Cyprus together, for example, in this room we have classes from Polychryso, who I'm glad to see, from Kalous İrtede. I would like to see next to them some Turkish Cypriot school here, for example, to be together. I have been in the committee, in the parliament, in the Committee of Education and Culture. And I was dealing with Erasmus a lot, of course. But believe me, I mean, a Greek Cypriot student can be over all places in Erasmus program, but no contact to a Turkish Cypriot, or vice versa. Turkish Cypriots cannot benefit from Erasmus program unless they live in the under government's control areas. So yes, EU, after the accession, after the failure of reunification, we know that acquis communautaire doesn't apply in the non-under control of government areas. But I mean, in this Protocol 10, there is an Article 3, which clarifies very clearly that that should not be an obstacle for economic development of the Turkish Cypriot community, to bring Turkish Cypriot community closer to the EU. And here I open a parenthesis, Harry, and come back to your question. Cyprus accession talks to EU brought an upheaval in Turkish Cypriot community. It caused a rebellion, and masses of Turkish Cypriots demonstrated day and night against the separatist leader of Rauf Denktaş to join together with Greek Cypriots the EU. So in that sense, EU really worked within the Turkish Cypriot community. No one would imagine that Rauf Denktaş would be removed from political life before. This is done by the EU accession of Cyprus and the dynamism which was created within Turkish Cypriot community. So the desire of Turkish Cypriots to be part of the European Union, it was very strong, and historically Turkish Cypriots consider themselves European, given that there is a secular community. They have been under influence of Kemalist Turkey, being secular, pro-European, European themselves. So there is many reasons for this. Now, this community failed to be full member of EU, of course, and there are some bits and pieces, rights decided for this Turkish Cypriot community. One of them is Green Line regulation. Is it functioning properly? No. I asked the Commission with my letter, what about the functioning of the Green Line regulation? Answer is no, it doesn't function properly. There is a financial aid to Turkish Cypriots. Okay. But overall, how can we go back to the founding principles of the European Union, going to the founding fathers and mothers, to understand what is the mindset behind the European Union? It is to bring people into interdependent relations in the spaces of economy, trade, education. Now, do we consider this? Not at all. So there is, I'm sorry to say, after 20 years, we are in a very difficult position. I think there is no policy of reunification anymore. We don't really evaluate properly our membership into the EU, and we never try to bring some EU principles, founding principles. You know, it's very interesting to see all politicians speaking about solution of Cyprus conflict, and it goes like UN resolutions and the principles of the EU should be. Principles of the EU is defined by Jean Monnet, by Schuman, by Spinelli. I mean, these are the principles which brings people together, makes peace and reconciliation, creating this kind of common economic spaces. I struggled to get a common hospital, for example. I was promoting the idea during, for example, the COVID. No one pays attention to that. A common university, a common school, where are all these things? And no one even talks about this. So I struggled, Harry, 5 years as a member of the Committee of Education and Culture, trying to get this thing goes on. And what I experienced, I'm going to share with you. My engagement to bring Turkish Cypriots to more close to the EU was not a Turkish Cypriot affiliation. I did this under my political ideology of a federalist, mainly because so you build a federal perspective. So what I experienced very clearly was, on the one hand, Republic of Cyprus was not interested into this, not to say that sometimes directly was involving in stopping any perspective, because of recognition issue, which I call recognition phobia. All right? And on the other hand, I was challenged by Turkey and Turkish Cypriot separatist leader who doesn't want Turkish Cypriots to come closer to the EU. And these extremes, they meet at the same point. So we need, after 20 years, reconsider how to move on in trying to create a really reconciled European society in Cyprus, implementing principles, understandings, and values in deeper sense, not in a formalistic way, and try to go ahead, because instrumentalizing the EU to exercise pressure upon Turkey and hoping for a better solution, which is, by the way, the doctrine of late Tassos Papadopoulos when he invited Greek Cypriots to vote against Annan Plan in 2004. He was suggesting that we're going to pressurize Turkey on the way to the EU and we're going to get a better solution. That has been a state doctrine since then, and it doesn't bring anything. This all should be revisited. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Niyazi, for this very candid account of things. I'm cognizant of the time. To my great disappointment, it seems that we won't really have time for questions. To my great consolation, so much wisdom here, I think, is food for thought for all of us in taking things forward. If you couldn't make it, then I wish you all the best with any potential frustration you might have with people who succeeded you or are about to succeed you in the organs. But yes, hopefully we need to hope for the better. It is my sincere hope that Cyprus will, taking the lead from what you were saying, will start partaking in the grander European debates. Utilitarianism remains with me from what you have talked about. It's understandable for perhaps a smaller member state at the outskirts of Europe, but on the other hand, I think this is something that does come up from time to Brussels when we ask for things. We're asked back, and what has your contribution been to the grander European debates? And I'm afraid that this is something that we haven't necessarily been very successful with. With that, may I kindly ask you in joining me in thanking the panel for the wonderful contributions, and thank you for attending. I think we have another panel